Welcome back to another episode of The Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst, and today's guest is Cameron Rogers, the voice behind @freckled foodie. She is a content creator and host of the Freckled Foodie and Friends podcast. Through her multiple platforms, Cameron creates a space where content is approachable and authentic, and she is the truest version of herself. Prior to pursuing Freckled Foodie full-time, Cameron worked on Wall Street for 5 years until she was in a life-altering accident and decided it was time to wave goodbye to the corporate world and change the direction of her work to embody things she deeply cares about. Cameron is a passionate advocate for mental health awareness and shares her struggles with her audience on things like pregnancy, postpartum depression, and parenting, always in pursuit of a genuine discourse on the trials of motherhood. Lately, she has been super excited to share all the amazing benefits that have come from going alcohol-free, which we dive into today and more. So let's get this conversation going and welcome Cameron Rogers to the Adversity Advantage podcast. Cam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I love being on the other side of podcasts. It's so much easier being in this seat.
Yeah, it's refreshing too, right? For one thing, not to have to do maybe as much research or just a lot of prep, but also like you get to talk about yourself for once. Because I guess as hosts, like part of our job is to really like get in deep into the guest story and their background and try not to talk too much. But I'm excited to have you on here because your story is so relatable to so many people right now with regards to your relationship with alcohol. And so I just want to kind of get right into it. So it's been almost 5 months you've been without alcohol. If you could maybe share with my listeners, what's your relationship with alcohol been up until the point you decided to stop? And then like what was going through your mind? What did the day-to-day look like when you decided to give it up? And what was the real cause of your decision to stop?
Yeah, definitely. My history with alcohol, I would say I always had a healthy relationship with alcohol. I grew up in a very alcohol forward home in the sense where it was always present. So it wasn't this like, oh, you can't drink until you're 21. And in high school, I was sneaking around. And then you get to college and it's like, what is alcohol? And, there are kids that definitely experience that. And I think those are the kids typically that get to college and lose a little bit of control and just go full from 0 to 60 and like potentially end up in situations they don't want to be in. For me, alcohol was always present. So it wasn't like this untouched thing that I wondered about. That being said, like I was never the person, I wasn't the friend that was constantly getting too drunk. I wasn't the friend that ever had to be taken care of. Like I would drink. Yes, I would get drunk and I would enjoy and, like dive into all of that. But I never felt like I had a problem with alcohol. I was definitely drinking regularly, but it was, I guess, more frequently and less in the amount wise, if that makes sense. And for me, I really actually just enjoy the taste. Like I think of a drink as an extension of a meal. I know if I'm having a certain meal, like I love a great crisp IPA with it, or a certain time, nothing is like tastier than a spicy margarita. So like I wasn't drinking to get drunk. I drank because I enjoyed the taste of alcohol. Did I also enjoy the things that it did to me mentally in the moment, in like the quote unquote unwind story we've been sold with alcohol? Yes. But for me, I struggle with anxiety and I definitely have leaned on the side of depression, especially since having a child. And the turning point for me was just this one morning after a night out with friends where we were on a double date. I wasn't even really drunk. I just had a few drinks. And the next morning, I just felt like shit. And I was like, I don't feel like being a mom. I don't want to do any of these things I have to do today. I just want to lay in bed. And I noticed that the moments where I wanted to mom the least were the moments where I had consumed alcohol prior, like the night before. Being hungover as a parent is a whole new type of hangover. And for me, I'm like, I really enjoy being a mom. I'm good at this. Why am I doing something that's making me enjoy this less? If I want to love this as much as humanly possible, why am I making it harder for myself when I already was struggling mentally with a lot of the changes that come with becoming a mother? So I just kind of said, I'm going to cut back a bit. I thought it would be like a week. There was no set goal. There still is no set goal. It was just, it's not serving me. It's not helping me. It's mentally impacting me in a negative way. So why am I continuing to do this? And that week just kind of continued and continued. And then I remember thinking, oh, well, I have this wedding coming up for my friend. Like, I'll probably drink then. And then the wedding came, and I was like, I actually have no interest in drinking. Like, I feel really fucking good. I don't really want to drink. And that has just kind of continued. And here we are 5 months. And, I'm not sober. I do enjoy cannabis a lot, but for me, there's a massive difference in those two, the way it affects me in the moment and afterwards. And it's just honestly been an incredibly eye-opening experience for me, as not only have I noticed massive mental shifts, but it's developed a ton of conversations between people in my life, me unlearning things that I've always thought to be normal. Like, there's so much that goes into giving up specifically substances, and it's been a very eye-opening experience, to say the least.
Thanks for sharing all that. And I think your story is so common because there's a lot of people that have this unhealthy relationship with alcohol or any other substance is making their life worse and they're not feeling their best self, but it's not like to the point where their life is like ruined, where they're losing their job, they're losing their marriage, they're in, having like bad relationships with their kids, they're, not getting out of bed. Like, it's not to that point. And there's so many people that I think they question their relationship with something like alcohol, but just struggle to take that first step and stop. And I think a lot of times people future trip and they're like, man, like, I don't want to have to give it up forever. And I think the way you did it was beautiful. Like, you just kind of committed, you're just stopping for that moment and just seeing where it led you. You talked about that you didn't really have like a date in mind as far as or how long you were going to not drink for, but you've continued. It's been almost 5 months now to not drink. Like, other than the way you've noticed your improvement in your mood and how you feel and that sort of thing, like, what else has like kept you like going? I mean, with this, like, what else has kept you just abstaining from alcohol?
For me, it's honestly, I'm just so much happier. And like, that's my main goal in life, is to be the happiest I possibly can. And because I feel so much happier and generally just lighter, like, things don't affect me the way they used to. I am not as anxiously focused on things that don't deserve my time. I am not spiraling. I am not quick triggered or easily frustrated. Like, those things that I think I just took for my normal are way less. And for me, it's kind of this very clear distinction of, do I want to continue to feel this way? Is not feeling this way worth having those drinks at night? No. I also feel I still have a ton of freaking fun when I go out. I've been to multiple weddings. I've been to multiple bachelorettes. Like, it has not impacted me in the slightest, which is like, I think, the biggest shock for me. And another massive factor is when I'm coming home from those things, weddings, bachelorettes, just the next day after nights out, I am not like a mental mess that I used to be. Yes, maybe I'm tired, but I'm able to go about my life. I'm not spiraling, questioning everything, anxious over something I did or said or what tomorrow holds. Like, there's none of that. And for me, that is just so freeing.
Right. That's one of the most challenging things, I think, for so many people is they're like, all right, if I don't drink, like, how am I going to have fun? Like, how am I going to go to this event and not drink? How am I going to go out with my friends and not drink? How am I going to go to this party and not drink? Like, when you were going to your first event, like post, abstinent from alcohol, like, was there any fears that came up, any kind of emotions where you were kind of questioning whether you should go, whether you should stay in? And if so, what did that look like?
Honestly, no. There were never moments where I was like, should I go now that I'm not drinking, or should I stay home? Like, that never crossed my mind ever. I will say that I mentioned, I enjoy marijuana and cannabis. Like on nights, if I'm going out, such as these weddings, bachelorettes, like I am usually taking an edible of sorts. So I am not completely sober. I always want to make that clear. Not that you need these things. For me, I just feel like once I kind of made that decision, I remember heading into a bachelorette recently. I was like, I feel like this is probably going to be the time that I'm going to crave alcohol, that I'm probably going to want to drink more than any other time. And then the moment came and I was like, I actually don't. I'm really okay not. And I think there was like a flip that was switched after reading Quit Like a Woman. That changed a lot for me on the narrative of the alcohol industry and this kind of story we've been told as a society that we need alcohol to celebrate or to have fun. And I'm fortunate that all of my friends are incredibly supportive people who want the best for me as well. So there was no pushback, there was no questioning, there was no peer pressure. It was like, you're not drinking? Okay, great. No, it doesn't matter. And that's something I say a lot to my community. And I think I'm about to be 31. So maybe it is different potentially with age, but anyone who's questioning your decision to not drink or pressuring you, come on, just have one, it'll be fun. Like the people who are so worked up about you choosing not to drink are usually, from my past experience, the people who need to reflect on their own relationship the most because they want you to be as inebriated as they are. They want you to not be sober and able to judge them for potential actions or take note of their behavior. Like I found that the people who are the most worked up about it are the people who usually have the least healthy relationship with alcohol. And so if someone is giving you that pushback or peer pressure or whatever, I always say, and I have said in the past, there was a period in my 20s when I didn't drink either, where I would just say, like, I'm not drinking, but it doesn't affect you. I'm here to have a fun time. I'm still here to hang out. I'm not saying you can't drink. You can still do you. I'm just choosing not to drink. And that's really the end of it. Like, there shouldn't be a further conversation on that, in my opinion.
Right. And you said something that I think is so important for people to hear in that, like the people that are trying to guilt you into drinking or shaming you to drink or saying that you're not as fun as you used to be or whatever the case may be, as far as like things that people do say, like in many cases when you stop drinking, like they're not your real friends. Like your real friends are going to support you no matter what. Your real friends are going to be there for you. They're going to want to see you win. And also, like you said, typically like people project, right? So if they're feeling, and you felt this way, I've heard you talk about that, you knew like in your gut, like you should try and not drink, right? There was a time where you felt like you would do better without alcohol. And there's a lot of other people that feel this way. And when they feel this way and they're not making that decision, they're going to project that onto you so that they can kind of feel better about themselves. And you've been through a lot. Like I know in your story, which I encourage people to go check out some of the other interviews you've done where you talk more about this, but I know you've been hit by a car. You've had, stuff with your own like health and fitness. I mean, your relationship with food, and you've overcome so much shame. You've overcome so much adversity in your life. But I know that the shame and judgment that comes from like not drinking can be very heavy sometimes for people, especially in the world that we live in. And I know that you've talked about that, like part of what you're doing now when you go out and doing like the edibles is like kind of like you're not at the place yet where you feel that you can go out without like doing that because of like the shame and judgment. Like, why do you think that the shame and judgment around something like alcohol is so much more challenging?
So I just want to clarify one thing, and maybe I misunderstood you. I feel confident going out and not having anything. It's not shame that's pushing me to enjoy an edible. Like I'm fine not smoking or taking an edible and not drinking and being completely sober out. And I have done that. For me, I really enjoy cannabis. Like personally, it does incredible things for my mental health. It really helps with my creativity. It allows me to just like slow down in my anxious, overworking brain. And I feel absolutely no negative side effects the next day. I think it's a very healing plant. I don't feel shame around not drinking at all, but I do think as a society, it's very confusing that it's the one drug that we you get negative feedback if you're not doing it. You know, instead of questioning, why are you drinking? It's why aren't you drinking? Like that is where I think there's a huge misconnect. And when we talk about cannabis, for instance, like if anything, I feel it's people project onto me regarding choosing cannabis, especially as a mom. People have a lot of opinions. And that's where I'm kind of like, well, hold up. Why is there opinions or shaming of someone choosing to partake in a plant that is legal in the state that I live in, is not a downer poison such as alcohol, and is only bringing me positive side effects? Why is there shame in that? Yet we've so willingly welcomed this quote unquote mommy wine culture and created a whole movement around it where it's like, oh, mommy needs her wine. Like, that's where I'm confused. That's what makes no sense to me, is like the acceptance of this one thing and then potential opinions, shame, whatever you want to call it, around specifically moms choosing modalities that help them.
I think I maybe misunderstood maybe something you might have said on your podcast, but I definitely like understand like where you're coming from, and this all totally like makes sense.
Oh, I think I know what you're saying on my most recent episode.
Yeah.
So yeah. I said I felt a little bit of shame saying that someone asked me, do you always partake in edibles or mushrooms when you're going out? And I was like, for the most part, yeah, I have. And I did feel like uncomfortableness saying that. But I'm like, that's so fucked, because I would never feel shame or judgment, I guess is the word, judgment, by saying, yeah, I drink every time I go out, which most people would confidently say, I think, in at least the circle that I'm in.
With regards to like alcohol, cannabis, and stuff like that, like I think it all comes down to, and I think we touched on this a few minutes ago, like how it impacts your life. Like if you're saying you can use it like in a healthy way and it's improving your life and it's like not being destructive and all, then like obviously like who's to judge you for doing something like that, especially like when you have the self-awareness around your relationship with substances. Like you chose, like your life wasn't falling apart when you were drinking. You just chose to abstain from it because it wasn't improving your quality of life. And I think that's what it comes down to, is like looking at how does this fit in with your quality of life? Like, is it improving it or not? Is it impacting your relationships and that sort of thing? And you mentioned like the mommy wine culture. We've talked about how normalized alcohol has been in society. It's prevalent in a lot of homes when people are growing up. I mean, you're seeing people get like tailgating at club sporting events, at high school football games and stuff like that. You've experienced both. Like, which one do you think has had more of an impact on you? Was it the normalization of drinking as an adult in our society, or like it being around you at all times when you grew up?
I think it being around me at all times growing up created this narrative that it was always there. However, it made it not seem like it was a forbidden fruit that I wanted. Does that make sense? Like by having it available, it wasn't this thing that I then seeked out and potentially took advantage of. And I think as an adult, everything, specifically, I live in New York, I worked in finance for 5 years. Like this culture is very alcohol focused. And I think the harder thing was as an adult, everything surrounding around alcohol. Like even when I was working in the corporate world with client stuff, like there were times I didn't want to drink. But if you're at client dinners and the client wants to drink, or the client wants to stay out later, or the client wants to order another round of shots, it's kind of like you felt like you had to. And no, you don't have to. But I was young and I felt that pressure that it was what I was supposed to do. I think that focus on alcohol when I was older, specifically in the culture like New York City, where pretty much everything social is focused around alcohol, I almost think that was harder and made it more difficult to navigate because it makes it so normalized that it's hard to walk away from. And if you walk away from it, it almost feels like, well, how come everyone else can enjoy this? Why can't I? And why am I now the different one? Why is everything in this social culture focused on the one thing that everyone seems to enjoy that I don't.
It's that shame of like, what's wrong with me? Like, I'm not enough. Like, you either have to have alcohol to have fun, or like, how come so and so can enjoy it and they're not having like sleepless nights or anxiety or depression, or I can go on with examples. And like, I am like, why am I feeling this way? And I think, like, kind of like you did, you have to take your power back. You have to just understand that everybody has a different relationship with stuff like this. Some people it can be great, and many people it's not. And you just have to understand, like, where does that fit within your life, and just accept where you're at, and then kind of, use that acceptance as a good first step to move forward in whatever direction you can to improve that relationship with alcohol and improve your life. I think one of the things that's challenging for a lot of people, especially this time of year, it's, where it's going to be August as we're recording this next week. It's summertime, a lot of parties, graduation parties, barbecues, cookouts. Like, you really don't have any reason other than doing this for yourself to not drink, where other people, they might be on probation. They might be like getting drug tested for like a treatment or outpatient like rehab. They could have like lose their marriage. I can go on with examples of like why like people aren't allowed to drink, right? Like, there are repercussions of what could happen. What do you tell yourself when an urge comes up? Are there urges that come up, like, and how do you resist them?
There honestly have not been many urges at all. There was one weekend, like you mentioned, the summer. Like for me, we spent a lot of time at the shore, and that for me encapsulates a lot of like drinking culture. And I remember there was like one of the first weekends we were all sitting down to lunch and everyone like grabbed a beer or a high noon. And for me, like I love the actual taste of those things. And I was like, I really want like a good beer with this. We were having burgers and stuff. So I have like non-alcoholic beers that I love because I love the taste of beer. So I'll drink those on those days. But like I also know that while I might crave the taste of something, I don't actually want the object. And I think there's a difference there. And I've struggled a bit in getting clear on the verbiage around my emotions on that, trying to explain it to others. But I might crave something, but I know I don't actually want it because I know I don't like the way I feel after I'm consuming it. And look, I have a history of like black and white culture, especially when it comes to diet culture and restricting. And that is easy for me to make a rule and stick to it. And I'm really trying to be clear that I don't encourage that behavior necessarily. And like, that's not something I want to do. I don't want to make alcohol this like thing I'm afraid of. However, I'm not interested in having it right now. And like, that's kind of the bottom line. Who knows? That could change. But right now, that's how I feel.
It's cool to hear that you really haven't had many temptations or urges, just given the fact that you've talked about openly how much you've struggled with like stuff postpartum and depression, anxiety, like different levels of stress throughout your life. And like many times, like that's when urges come, is like when you're feeling anxious or you're feeling like depressed, you're like, oh my gosh, I just want to have a drink and just numb out. Like yours came kind of more around like societal thing of something that you would do socially, not necessarily because of like how you were feeling. With that said though, I'm sure there's days where you aren't feeling 100%. I'm sure you, like many of us, struggle with anxiety and stuff like that. Like, what are you doing to cope and help yourself, like on the self-love aspect, without alcohol?
Yeah. I have a large toolbox of things that I do to help with my anxiety. First and foremost, like right off the bat, first thing in the morning, I meditate every day. That's a big one for me. I spend 5 to 10 minutes with a journal first thing in the morning before my son wakes up so that I have some time for myself to kind of just decompress and let out some of my emotions. With that being said, I do wake up an hour before my son wakes up so that I have that time for me. I noticed that once he was sleeping through the night and I was able to do this, if I woke up at the same time as him, then I felt I was constantly responding to others throughout the day. And I needed some time for myself to set that like ground for the day. I am on antidepressants, which I'm a big proponent of medication. Some of us need it, and it's really freaking game changing for me. I am in therapy once a week. I really try to limit my time on social media in the moments where I'm not feeling great. I don't think the comparison of social media ever helps when you're already down. And it's honestly the small things. Like for me, if we're going out on a date night or I'm going out with friends, I still really enjoy that time with a mocktail of sorts. Like that is still very fun for me. That's still unwinding because it's social in-person time. I also love like a weekly ritual I have, which seems so silly, but it's one of my like favorite self-care things that I do postpartum with an edible or not, take like a long nighttime shower and wash my hair, like really take my time in there. There's no rush to like go get Liam. He's asleep for the night. I get to enjoy myself and sit on the couch or in bed in my pajamas and read one of my favorite books or whatever I'm reading at that time and drinking. This is so odd, but I can't explain it. I love the sensation like a seltzer over ice with a glass straw. Something about that combination with like ice cream on the side for me is chef's kiss.
I love it. And I think it's important to have this variety of tools like in your toolkit because A, there's not a one size fits all approach. And B, what worked at one point might not work at this point, right? Like you might need meditation this day. You might need a hike this day. You might need a call with a friend this day. You might need a walk or a lift session, whatever. Like things change as your life evolves and depending on the day. So I think it's super smart of you, obviously. I think it's super, smart to have just a variety of tools in the tool chest. One of the things that I wanted to, I guess, go into next is a lot of people, they drink to numb anxiety. And I know for you, as we've talked about, drinking contributed to your anxiety and made things worse. So on a level of like 1 to 10 scale, where was your anxiety at when you were regularly consuming alcohol and where is it at now?
On a daily basis, it was probably around a 7, 8. On a hungover basis, it could get as high as a 9, 10. Like those were probably the worst days. Now, on a regular basis, I'd probably put it at like a 4. It still exists, but it's a lot different. And then, I don't think this is just going to like get rid of my anxiety. I think that those of us who have general anxiety disorder, that might just be something we live with. I've come to terms with this like concept of trying to perfect it. But for me, while I understand I can feel anxious over certain things and certain things can spark that anxiety, and not every moment's going to be the same, I'm trying to the best of my ability, limit the amount of time that on a baseline level, I am anxious. And that's what cutting out booze has done.
It's incredible. I just wanted to provide some context because it's not easy. I think a lot of people will say, well, this like reduced my anxiety or did this. But like when people actually hear like a tangible number of like, oh my gosh, like my anxiety was at this number. And then when I was hungover, it was like up here. And then now it's like it's still there, but it's like way down. And you have more tools in your toolkit on how to like navigate through that in a way that makes it much more manageable. I know you're a parent and you've now seen it from both sides. You grew up around alcohol a lot. You had your own experience with drinking, and now you're a parent. How has this whole experience shaped you as a parent? Have you and your husband changed some things as far as like what he does, or have you guys talked about like how you're going to raise your kids in a different way?
We haven't dived into that topic yet since our son is still so young, but I also I can reflect back on my childhood, and there are things, of course, we all have things from our childhood that we want to repeat for our potential future children and things that we don't want to repeat. For me, I don't really want alcohol being as prevalent as it was. Obviously, I'm not going to say that he's never going to see alcohol. That's not a realistic stance in this country. But I also just think providing him with context that you don't need to constantly be drinking, or you don't need to drink to have fun. And, that's a decision he'll eventually make on his own of whether he wants to consume alcohol or not. But just providing him with, I guess, examples that you can still enjoy yourself without it.
Right. Yeah. That's really cool that you're thinking about that now, because there's a lot of people that kind of would have just stuck with what you kind of first said, where it's like, he's so young or she's so young. Like, what's the point? I'll worry about that like 10 years from now. But the fact of the matter is, like, time flies, and you're going to wake up one day and your kid's going to be like 12 and you're like, oh my gosh, where'd the time go? And you're focused on so much else that goes along with that you forget about, the conversation that you maybe wanted to have 10 years ago about something like drinking or the relationship with alcohol or how it's going to be present in the household and stuff like that. I want to kind of shift gears a little bit. Like, I know, like, one of the other things that you've had a ongoing transformational journey with is your relationship to diet, health, and fitness. And it appears now that what you're doing is you're more focused on strength training and that sort of thing. Like, where are you at with your health and fitness journey? Like, what are your main goals, and like, how is it serving you today?
Yeah, fitness has always been a very large part of my life. I was an athlete my entire life. I played at a collegiate D1 level. Like, it was always a big thing for me. And it has been, again, actually something in my toolbox in terms of my anxiety. I definitely let it take over a bit too much brain space and time in my mind. When I became obsessed is an extreme word, but I definitely overanalyzed it and let it take a lot of my time. And for me, the biggest difference is, why am I working out? Back in, I don't know, my early 20s, it probably was. I was working out to look a certain way, to weigh a certain number, those things that are not for personal reasons. That's more for external validation. That, in my opinion, is not healthy. My relationship has very much shifted after my accident that you mentioned earlier. Now it's solely because I have the utmost respect and gratitude for my body, and I want to keep my body physically able and strong. And for me, it's a massive mental release, like, hugely. And I'm focused now, honestly, on like what makes me feel good. I am really, really deep in my Pilates practice. I love Pilates. I've cut out most of my cardio, mainly because I'm just not, I was definitely a big runner at one point in my life. I'm just not interested in it right now. I also love strength training. I'm really interested in getting back into my yoga practice. That's something that I keep saying I want to do, but I have not done yet. But it kind of varies. It honestly depends on the days. A lot of days it's just going for very long walks with my son and taking him to the park. He's like almost 30 pounds. So, I mean, my arms have truly never been stronger, just from simply holding him. But that's another thing when it comes to exercise, is like showing him. I do 90% of my workouts in his playroom with him while he's playing by my side, and showing him how important exercise can be in the sense of taking care of my health, being a strong, capable woman, and helping start the day on a positive note, rather than using language of, oh, I ate this last night, I have to do a longer workout. Like, that kind of stuff is so toxic and can so intensely get ingrained in a young child's brain from an early age. So for me, that's very much an active conversation my husband and I have had around the way we're going to speak about things like that around our son.
You touched on something that I think a lot of people struggle with, and they have an unhealthy relationship with their body. In many ways, like, hate their body. They might hate the way they look. They might just have like an immense amount of anxiety and stress about like everything that they eat. They might just look in the mirror, and even though like even though they look a certain way, they might see something completely different, and they really just have this level of distaste towards the person they see in the mirror. And and I've been there, so I'm just speaking from personal experience, that you just focus on the external. You focus on the scale, you focus on what you look like with your shirt off. Like, for me, that's what I focused on. You focus on validation. Like, are people like giving me compliments about the way I look? And you almost forget like why you started. You almost forget like the mental and emotional benefits that come with exercise. For many people, is why they stick to it. Like, what is your advice for somebody who's listening to this, that maybe they were in the same position that you were in, where you had this unhealthy relationship with your body and exercise? Like, what would be a few good first steps for them to take to start to transform that?
For me, the most beneficial thing I did was self-talk to myself in a mirror. and actually practice gratitude towards my body. I really viewed it as like an angel and a devil. And I just wanted to strengthen and amplify the angel voice. So if there were times that my quote unquote devil voice would rear its ugly head and say something negative about my body, whether it was when I looked in the mirror or saw a photo of myself or passed by a reflection, I would literally stop in my tracks and affirm whatever part of my body that the negative voice was attacking. So, say it was my stomach, I would stop and look at myself in the mirror. If I was with other people who were not like my family or husband, I would just say it in my head. And I would say, like, thank you, belly, for allowing me to one day, this was prior to being pregnant, one day carry my future children. Thank you, belly, for holding majority of my organs. Thank you, belly, for allowing me to eat food and somehow process and turn it into poop. Like, same with our legs. It depends on the body part that you are more prone to picking apart and critiquing, but it's mind-blowing to me that we spend so much time critiquing parts of our bodies instead of actually thanking them for working and for allowing us to wake up and to breathe and to get from one place to the other. And our strong legs that keep us dancing all night long with our friends, or our incredibly strong arms that allow you to pick up your child. Like, very simple things that we just take for granted every day. And once I flipped the script on that narrative, for me, everything changed. It also became very clear to me that there's so much more important shit out there in the world to think about than what I look like or what size my jeans are or how much I weigh. Like, it's literally the least interesting thing about me. And once I let go of it, I realized how much more potential I had of things to do because it was taking up so much wasted brain space.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think the more you focus on like the external things that might come with something like exercise, health, nutrition, wellness, like the more you forget about like not just why you started, but what really matters with it. The benefits that come for your mental health, your mood, your energy, and also like what your body, like you said, like what it does for you, like as the way it functions. Like you mentioned your belly and your organs and all these other things that we just forget about because we put so much focus and emphasis on the vanity of it. And I think it's also important, I think, for a lot of people, it's okay, obviously, to want to look a certain way, but you have to also ask yourself, like, is it to the point where you're not going out with your friends? Is it to the point where you're miserable? Is it to the point where you're forgetting why you started? Is it to the point where you're just beating yourself up day in and day out over this? And I think that's just part of the journey, is learning how to have this healthy relationship where you care enough about your body as a whole and who you are as a person that I think once you master that, the results will come. Like you'll have the body that you want and you'll have a healthier relationship with it.
I totally agree.
From here, I guess one of the questions I have for you is that there's a lot of people that, like I said at the beginning, that they might be questioning their relationship with alcohol and they just either don't know where to start or they're afraid of giving it up because they don't think they're going to be able to have fun, or maybe just aren't confident that they just can't drink for a day or two, or whatever the case may be. If somebody came to you in a coffee shop, they ran into you in one in New York, and they were like, I'm really inspired by your journey and everything that you've accomplished so far without alcohol, like would have been like, 3 to 5 like keys to your success with it that you think have really helped, like what would they have been? Or what would you say to them?
I would say, like, just try it on. If you're coming from a place of, and obviously this is not talking about those who are struggling with addiction, but if you're coming from a place of interest, like, try it on. See what it feels like to not drink for a week, with like the idea that I'm just going to try this for a week. We'll see how I feel. I'm not saying it's a forever thing, because you might notice a huge shift and then you might just want to maintain that shift. And look, not everyone, like, I'm not the no alcohol police. I'm not saying everyone needs to cut out alcohol at all. Some people are able to drink and mentally be okay. But I think if it's something you're considering, question like, well, why am I still drinking if I don't want to? That's a very interesting thing to unpack. If you are someone who doesn't want to drink anymore, why are you still drinking? And that's not something I can answer for you, but I think that's a very interesting journal prompt to sit down with. I would try it on for a night, 2 nights, 3 nights, a week, see how it feels. I would also recommend talking to some of your friends about it. Like for me, I know when I've talked about it with a few of my friends, some of my friends are even like, I'm jealous. Like, I want to do this. And that's how I felt. Like, I was jealous of people that didn't drink, which made no sense to me because I remember saying, it'd be one thing if I was jealous of someone who was like 6'10", because I just can't casually grow like a foot and a half, but I can make a decision to just not drink. Like, I shouldn't be jealous of something that I can tangibly decide to do. Another piece of advice would be, this kind of is in line with testing it out, but try out, there are so many mocktail recipes in today's world right now, especially on social media. Like, try making one and see what that feels like one night to either enjoy with your dinner rather than a glass of wine, or get at a bar and see how you feel.
Those are great points. And I think something that you said that I think is so important for people to try is like to try, just to go without it and maybe set a goal to go without it for a week and then just see how you feel. And it's just like anything else. If you feel better by doing that and without it, then you're going to be inspired to do more of it, because your brain just can somehow say like, well, I'm actually happier without it. Like, I'm a little bit less irritable. Like, I'm actually sleeping better. I'm a little less anxious. Like, let me just go without it. But I think the challenging part, I know we've touched on this a lot, is like, what are you going to say when someone's like, hey, are you sure you don't want to drink? Or what are you going to say when somebody's like, oh, I got an event to go to at a restaurant, you want to come? And then you get there and like somebody's like, what do you want to drink? Like, what are you going to say? And I think that's where people kind of slip up. And I know you've had some supportive friends along the way, and you've had people that have been in your corner throughout this process. And I think we touched on this a little bit, but let's just say somebody's at a party and their friend is like, well, why aren't you drinking? Like, aren't you going to have a drink? Like, what would you say in that moment?
I think it's totally circumstantial because it depends on the person of what is your why and what are you comfortable sharing. This happened to me the other night, actually. Someone who I'm like loosely friends with, but does not know that I don't drink anymore. And we were at a birthday party. It was at someone's apartment, and he had like made margaritas, and I was like, hey, does this margarita mix already have alcohol in it? And he's like, yes, a lot. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I poured just a seltzer in my cup, and he was like, oh, do you not want any? And I was like, oh, no, I don't drink. And he was like, wait, really? I didn't know that. Like, what's going on? And not in like a condescending way, just really curious. And I was like, oh, you know what? It just doesn't serve me anymore. Like, it was really negatively impacting my mental health. I noticed I was more anxious and depressed with it. And so I cut it out, and I feel great. So I've just continued to cut it out. And he's like, that's awesome. Good for you. Like, it doesn't have to be this huge thing. So it's up to you of what your why is and what you want to share. I feel very comfortable sharing that information. I have no shame over that whatsoever. I think it's up to you and what you want to say. What I will say is if someone continues to push back of, come on, just have one, that's where I'm like, hey, it actually doesn't matter if I'm drinking. It shouldn't change anything for you. I'm just choosing not to drink. I'm still here. You can still do you. That's where I would then push back and be like, nope, we're all good here. This isn't really up for a debate. I'm deciding not to drink. You can do what you choose.
I mean, I think it's really admirable, number one, that you kind of stood your ground. And I think, too, it's enlightening for people hearing this to know that, like, when you come off like with a certain level of self-awareness and confidence, like, people tend to just kind of support you and like kind of leave you alone a little bit because you're affirmative and you kind of you give a good reason. Like, what typically happens though is someone's like, why aren't you drinking? You're like, I don't know, I'm just not drinking. And they can tell like that you're lying, that something's off. So they're going to continue prying and prying and prying.
Right. Like, if someone responded to that being like, come on, just have a drink, after me saying it makes me anxious and depressed, like, that would be really fucked up of that person. So for me, I'm like, if I lay it all out there, like, yeah.
Right. But what typically happens is most people are they're nervous, or there's still a lot of shame and guilt or judgment that's like inside, that's going through their mind around the subject, that they're just like, I just don't want to, I'm good. And then like, you're not giving anybody a real reason. So of course they're going to continue to ask. Last question I have for you comes back to parenting. I saw you make a post today about like some of the things you've noticed since you stopped drinking. I want to go into like one of the things you said about you as a mom. Like, how has you giving up alcohol and not drinking, how has that improved you? How has that improved your ability to be a mother?
Greatly. I struggled a lot with what I've now learned the term of matrescence, which is the evolution of becoming a mother and that period of time that a person goes through. For me, I knew I was a good mom. I knew I wanted to be a mom. I loved being a mom, but there were many moments where I didn't want to mom, if that makes sense. There were moments where I felt too overwhelmed, too anxious, depressed. I missed my old life. And a lot of that stemmed from, without me really realizing, but the impact that alcohol was having on my mental health. For me, now that I am a much naturally happier person without it, I am way more interested in doing all of the things that maybe at one point in my early postpartum stage, I was like overwhelmed by, or not interested at all, or too exhausted by. So for me, I'm able to be way more present. I would think I'm a much more enjoyable person to be around, specifically for my child. And it allows me to experience the highs just feel much higher and the lows feel less frequent, if that makes sense.
This has been awesome. I think a lot of people are going to relate to your story and your insight and your honesty. And if people want to connect with you more, they want to listen to your podcast, they want to learn more about you, like where's the best place for them to do that?
Thank you so much. The best place is on Instagram and or TikTok. It's at freckled foodie. And then my podcast is It's Freckled Foodie and Friends. And we do a new episode every Wednesday.
Sweet. Well, I will make sure to plug all that stuff in the show notes. And for those listening, what I invite you to do is to share a takeaway. Maybe it was something that she said about like why she stopped drinking. Maybe it was something that she said about what it's done for her for the positive. Maybe it was something that she said as far as advice for those that are sober curious or looking to change their relationship with alcohol, or what to say to somebody when they're asking you if you're going to have a drink or not. Whatever it was, share your takeaway and tag her and tag myself, because we'd love to hear your feedback. And we once again thank you for listening to this episode of The Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst, and we'll see you next time.